you're right. Listen. If I'm ordering something on Amazon, the second my mouse button clicks, I just want it to pop up in my hand.
Just like right there.
Even if it's like a hologram to make me feel like I have it ahead of time.
Yeah, ahead. Ooh, that would be cool.
Yeah.
You can unbox it with the hologram.
Well, imagine just testing products that were like holograms.
Yeah.
Were we
Is the
talking
video
about
on,
something
by
the
the
other
way?
day? Yeah.
What were we talking about the other day?
Something where they were like, have like an actual...
Oh, yeah. We're talking about that. That's already in the stages. I think it was
already in the
Peter
works.
Thiel or somebody I was listening to. He was talking about that where they have the like ultrasonic vibrations and stuff, and they have tens of thousands of cameras around.
Yeah, that's
to
right.
give you the, what was it in Star Wars when they go into the holodeck?
Yeah, the holodeck, right?
Yes,
but you
they're
can actually move it.
Yeah,
you can
and
actually
you can feel it. Yeah.
which is crazy. So if
Yeah.
you're vibrating something, you can feel it.
Yes.
Because
And
we
that's-
know, and our listeners here for higher density living, they all know that the universe is but vibration, right? It's a movement of light back and forth at varying levels, which determine our color, right? Our shape, our sound, and all of those things are the energy that gives you the sense of feel, right? The makeup for your body.
I just want a holodeck. That's so cool. And
I'd
you
be
walk
doing
in and
crazy
you're
stuff with it.
You're in the Wild West.
Yeah, I'd be doing crazy stuff.
And
with
you
it.
walk around, you're sweating and stuff. Eventually,
Yeah.
they're going to have that.
Met-
Since that is going to be.
Why is sweating the first thing that came to
It
your
was
mind?
interesting the other, because you're in the desert. It's really hot, and that's where we're at. In New
forgot,
Mexico.
yeah.
Quick question though, before we get into universal consciousness, I want to people to understand when we just have an episode on it with one of our sponsors, Tartle.co.
Tartle.co.
Yes, I want to get
TARTLE.
into why it's so important for someone to sign up for Tartle when it comes to consciousness.
Okay, so let's talk about the philosophical part of signing up on Tartle. Tartle is not only a system that, gives you some sort of financial benefit, right, for things that you are creating.
Exchanging money for data.
Yeah, exchanging money for data on a global marketplace, Tartle.co. All right, I'm done with the plugs. So the philosophical part of this is that when you go and you are populating these packets of information,
Right.
they force a self-reflection of you. Okay, so you are always constantly refining who you are, your thoughts, your preferences, your behaviors, your emotions. And these things are what people want to purchase. So what you do is you are constantly challenging and refining your perspective of reality and who you are as a human being, the quality of you. And from one aspect of it, outside of the emotional review that you're getting, you get, a financial payback for it.
Right.
A financial payback for reviewing, wow, is this the quality of who I am? This is what I'm doing. The information I create, is this really me?
Right.
Well, people are willing to pay for me at this value and for what I'm offering. What happens if I continually refine myself to be a better person with my preferences, right? My accuracy, if I'm more truthful, and that derives a higher value. So philosophically, when we're looking at what Tartle's doing for your consciousness and your spirit and who you are, it's refining your ways of thought. It's refining that perspective by going through and always reanalyzing how you look at the world and yourself. So in a greater picture, it's not only a system to create that financial benefit in trading your data for money, but it's a way to shed the things that really aren't you, get down to the nitty-gritty of who you are, and constantly review them and take an internal measurement, right? And it causes you to always focus on it all the time.
Yeah, because consumerism just shows the level of consciousness. So, a higher conscious beings in a collective, what would that be? What would they be consuming compared to, what is?
Jason, that's a great hypothetical question, right? So if I'm a being that's, so developed over a period of millions of years, money is no longer an object.
Right.
That was a tool for us to achieve, certain means of growth, evolutionary growth, but maybe only materialistic. And if you think about it from a logical point of deduction, if a species becomes so advanced, they leave that tool and they develop to things that are just more and more important. Because once you have everything you need, if you're so developed, you have infinite amounts of power, you have no resource scarcity, you can go wherever you want. What's the thing that you refine? So as you're exploring, you expand your perspective, right? And you are just refining your soul nature, the spirit nature of who you are. Because you realize that the greatest tool that needed to be worked on through its evolutionary path was the self.
Right.
And then through that refinement, that's what the focus would be on. So if there's a real thing that they are consuming for energy, that consummation of energy would be the thoughts, right? So they're consuming thoughts and ideas.
Because they're understanding that inner awareness and that collective of
Yes.
a group of peoples coming together, thinking thoughts is what dictates the energy that is around.
That is, their thought is their currency, because they know very well that the thoughts we have a direct makeup for our world's reality.
Yes.
So then for them, refining those thoughts and refining that reality, that's what they're going to feed off of. Not in some like alien way, like we're eating carcasses. No, like energetically absorbing it. Yeah. To literally enlighten themselves, to refine themselves and their character and their spirit and how they think and how they continue to evolve as these creatures of infinite energy.
Yeah. How many people are in the United States now? 9 million or something like that? I mean,
9 million?
I'm sorry.
Like 300 million?
Yeah, 300 million.
Yeah.
So I was thinking 9 billion in the
coronavirus hit hard in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. Which I want people to understand if they're listening to this. The scare will probably be over by the time this comes. But if look at the people that are dying, it is people that have already very sickly.
They're already very sick.
The flu kills more people than the coronavirus does.
Yeah, convalescent homes, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
People are old, elderly, trying to recover.
Yeah, they've gone through a surgery or something like that. They're, newly been sick before with some other disease.
Yeah, like most of the times you die is when you're
But I mean, if you're a healthy human being, the odds of you dying from that it's just a scare tactic from the media once again, because they got to pipe something so they can run those 24/7 shows with people with masks on, which even proven the other day that the masks don't even help.
Really?
It's like the washing of the hands.
Yeah.
I was reading Scientific American. They said it's actually the friction.
It's not the water. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not the water. It's not the soap. It's the friction that actually kills it, right?
Yes,
because at a really microscopic level, it doesn't feel like a lot of heat to you here doing this, but when you're doing it, it is burning things up.
Yeah,
and that's why if you do it a lot, some people have dirty hands, get like the black stuff. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, it's easy.
Scientific America, come on, get with it.
Yes,
this is old news.
Let's stop buying off onto this media cycle. This 24/7 cycle. Get off that cycle and get on the HDL cycle.
Jason, could we run a 24-hour HDL thing?
Oh, we could.
I
could literally. We'd have to take shifts.
There's like Alex Jones.
Yes.
And then there's us on our 24-hour cycle.
So I had a dream the other night. This is interesting. So we had like sub shows from the main show.
Get out of here.
So you were doing. So I was doing a show every day for like 2 hours a day where I went through the Bible. And I was explaining it in a higher density living.
I had a question about that
And then
today.
you were doing the, what is it, the Krav Maga?
Krav Maga?
Yes. No, not Krav Maga.
What?
Not the Israeli Special Forces.
I have a 2-hour special on Krav Maga.
No, the book, the spiritual book.
Raw?
Yeah, no, not Raw. The Brav Maga. Oh, people know.
Bhagavad Gita?
Yes.
You were swear to you right now, I gotta move the mic.
So I had a separate show and I was going through like chapter by chapter, verse by verse in the Bible and explaining higher density living.
Wow.
And then you were taking the same book and you had a separate show. And so people could follow along if that was the type of spiritual book that they like.
Yeah.
Then they could get kind of more of a common sense English explanation to each of the verses or chapters or whatever.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was doing a lot of research on the Bhagavad Gita last night. Yeah, so I was looking at specifically the poetry inside of it, what they would term as sacred utterances.
Yes.
And I'm like, this is incredible. And the fact that you just brought that up, am I supposed to be going through this book? And should I be dictating?
Yeah, I think that's probably in the future. That's what we'll be doing.
That's a Vedic script
because we'll have like subdivisions of different shows.
And I love explaining books.
Yeah, because I have the Bible has 66 books in one.
That's a lot of books.
So, whenever you look at, especially if you get into Jesus, whenever you look at Jesus, being who he was.
Yeah, he's always hip. He's always in.
Yeah. I mean, going through what he says exactly and then taking all the religion out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that would be cool to take spiritual books and just disseminate the truth.
Oh, that's really neat.
The universal truth.
Get rid of the stuff, anything that is like against your free will or sense of control.
Yeah, because you have to understand, when those books were written, it was at their level of consciousness.
That's exactly
There was
right.
truth. There's always truth. It's like a hot dog.
I don't eat those.
You have the bun. I eat the plant-based one. Have you had a plant? We had it at Marble.
Yeah,
remember that?
Great. They were absolutely delicious.
Yeah, they have them at Whole Foods.
Now I'm thinking about
they
it.
Have them. Have you seen the ones that are injected with mustard?
I just the way that carried like rolled off your tongue, the ones that they inject, like
no,
it's already a hot
They have a
dog.
plant-based hot dog.
Yeah,
And then there's mustard inside the center of it.
so it's like a Boston cream,
Yeah,
but like hot dog style
yes.
with mustard.
Yes, exactly. You have the bun, then you have the hot dog, right? So it's kind of the same thing, but different. Why are you laughing, bro? Okay, we're done, guys.
Oh,
we just solved universal consciousness in a hot dog.
That was the problem. Is we
3 layers.
Scientific America finally figured out how to inject mustard into the hot dog.
Now, those hot dog guys on the corners where you're from,
God.
they solved humanity.
I'm crying. I'm crying on air.
Oh, that's funny.
Never thought the hot
In
dog.
a good way.
I never thought the hot dog would get me.
Yeah. It could be like the Trinity.
The bun, the
Is
mustard,
God the
and
Father.
the dog. Yeah.
The Holy Spirit is the mustard. And the hot dog is Jesus. Could you imagine? Dude, we need to. So 2 shirts we need to make. We need to have Jesus walking around where he looks like Jesus, but he's
Yeah.
a hot dog.
I love that.
With the bun wrapped around him.
Yeah.
Because it's the Trinity, right?
I love that.
Then we need to make another shirt that's going to say, "Are you architect?" Because we need to talk about this.
Architect.
I corrected you as making fun of a word that was actually a word.
Yeah, you were like, you added an ED to the end? And then you were trying to belittle me on air.
Was I talking about your ED?
Yeah. Yeah. What is with your focus on my whole ED
Isn't that erectile
situation?
dysfunction? Oh, that's funny.
Oh,
So let's get into universal consciousness.
wow.
Do vegans have problems with that?
With what?
Erectile
consciousness?
dysfunction.
No, I don't think so.
I'd be curious.
I don't think so.
All those beta males out there.
They have shown that because of the improved blood flow from.
Well, I saw that
plant-based diet.
on Game Changers.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
whatever.
they had that.
And
With
if
those young guys.
I'll go to that
I think
institute.
like take an 80-year-old guy. Well, you're still young, bro. You're like in 20s.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good. No blue pill.
I got 3 pages of notes we got to get through. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Don't rush it.
So, science throughout the centuries
Mhm.
have called consciousness a hard problem. No pun intended.
Why?
I have that in my notes. Bro, that's the first part. Is that not the first part of my notes? I have nothing with ED in there.
And you have an asterisk next to it.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I have it in quotations. Look. We know where my theme is at right now.
I know where your consciousness level is.
Yes, exactly.
Lower density living with Jason. He has his own podcast.
Lower density living. I'm going in direct reflection.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know what I experienced last night.
Yeah.
As a 46-year-old male. This has turned into a horrific podcast.
This is like a lesser form of Howard Stern.
Yes. As we talk about universal consciousness.
Yeah.
So, we're going to get serious here. Here we go.
Yeah, hard problem.
So, where is it and what is it? Has been... Bro, this is funny. Oh my God. Do you remember the time where I couldn't stop laughing when we did the Tartar
I'm
episodes?
having a hard time right now. And I know I'm not overtired.
A hard time. We'll have to do hard times. Shirts, t-shirts.
We will.
Yeah.
With a hot dog Jesus on it.
Yes.
All right.
That'll be perfect. Okay. There's a reason they call it the hard problem consciousness. Where is it and what is it?
Okay.
That has been the 2 questions. And we've had philosophers down through the centuries from the Temple of Delphi,
Yep.
where they have the encryption up there to, know thyself, all the way to the point to where we're getting into quantum mechanics
Correct.
and quantum physics. And we're sitting there saying, it's funny. I was listening to a guy the other day and he was talking about dark matter. He's like, 90% of space is made up of dark matter, but we've never seen it. We've never touched it. We've never seen it. We can't put it in a lab, but we know 90% of space is made up of dark matter.
Guys,
we know absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah.
But we do know that there's dark matter.
We know absolutely nothing about consciousness apart from it's everywhere.
Yeah,
It is everything.
And I want to get into that because a lot of people don't understand. You can see it. I mean, we're all children of nature.
Yeah.
And from a small insect all the way to, if you want to layer, I don't like to layer people lesser than creatures
They're
or
not.
greater than.
They're just
because all is
separate.
one.
They're just in their own separate stage.
all is one.
Yeah.
So whether it's a beetle or whether it's a, whatever, a dolphin or an orca, because they have bigger brains than we do.
What about a cloud? What about something without a brain?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Or a tree?
Yeah, a tree. Yeah. There's a level of consciousness that is in everything because you don't have to teach. I was watching a documentary the other day with monkeys. It was funny how they lie and cheat.
You know,
That's a form of consciousness.
What you do with your free time just baffles me.
My free time? Bro. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It is mysterious.
Stay woke.
Yes. I don't have a copper pyramid like you do.
The thing is, let me tell you, if you
Are
want to
you
get in a
enjoying
meditative state at an accelerated rate, that's the way you do it.
Yeah, he's got 2 palm trees, and
Yep.
you have a meditation room.
Yes, I do.
You have 2 palm trees, and he has this big copper pyramid that he sits in the middle of.
Yeah. And, you know, people ask, like, why do you have a whole room for meditation? Like, why is that the only thing you do?
It puts you in a state, though, right?
Yeah, so the room, oh, man, okay. So
If you dedicate that architecture to meditation,
yeah.
then that alone creates that moment when you walk in there, you're already getting past the point.
Yes.
Because if you tried to meditate, it would be really hard if you tried to meditate at your desk at work.
Oh, yeah.
With constant interruption.
Because you already know that area, right?
Right.
Like when you go to bed, the body knows time to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're laying in bed, you're
It's like, why do we love our beds
yeah,
over everybody else's bed?
that's correct. You've actually, impressed consciousness on that bed, right? So
Yes.
let's give some examples of physics here because that's what we do in HDL.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some studies that were done on DNA, right? So they put DNA and they suspended it in water. Okay, so like saliva, and you have your double helix and stuff like that. And what they wanted to prove is that the light photons that actually make up DNA, right? Because light photons carry information,
Mm-hmm.
all right? What they found is that when they moved the DNA out of that area, out of that vial of water with the DNA in it, and they left, they found that the actual light photons of the structure of the DNA stayed there for up to 30 days.
Mm.
So let's think about this for a second. So just the DNA. No thoughts were involved, nothing. It was just sitting there in a vial. We're going to move it, and we're going to go back here with a really high-spectrum camera, and we're going to take some photography. Oh, my gosh. And in a full visible spectrum camera, we can actually see that the DNA continues to sit here for 30 days.
And how is that possible?
How is that possible? Well, what it shows you is that light, consciousness, right, a thought in a certain area or a piece of the body that is made up of this light energy, sits there and resonates. So it holds form and shape. So if you're talking about a bed, and you always have the conscious thought, right? Which is conscious thought is a vibration. Vibration is light. Okay. So if I have that conscious thought that the bed is where I go to sleep, that energy will always stay there in that bed. You impress the energy, consciousness actually into that area. So consciousness continues to maintain form for up to 30 days, like that conscious thought. So if you're constantly perpetuating that thought, like for instance, my meditation room, that's one place where one thing specifically happens. So it sets me in that state.
Right.
So like if I'm going to my bed, my state is I'm going to go to sleep. But if I'm going to the meditation room, I'm going to move into that frequency of energy because it's still sitting there.
Like you have a writing desk, and you go there and author, and then they just write at that writing desk.
That's precisely
Same
correct.
scenario.
That's precisely correct. And so that is the point between saying, if we look at consciousness, like why do I have this area and why do I dedicate that space, is because consciousness stays there. It actually is, it can be a physical thing. The energy, just because it's not there, does have a physical interaction with my body.
Yes, and it has, and whatever it may be with consciousness, you can have an interaction between different types of physical matter.
Sure.
I mean, regardless.
Okay, so whatever, it's HDL.
Like
share
whenever
this.
you pet your dog.
Yeah, and we'll go a step further from this, right? So dogs over time, you see that they start to adopt like a personality.
Right.
And yeah, one function of it is,
Are we raising a level of consciousness with the dog?
Yeah,
over time.
This is what I'm getting to.
Oh, sorry.
No, but you're jumping ahead. You've gotten a lot. You're sharp, right? So it's learn, teach, learn here.
Yeah.
So let's hold everybody's hand. So if you
we can hold it.
If you get a new dog, right, they don't
Right.
really understand your habits, your emotions, the way you act, when you look at them,
Right.
or the connected thought over time that the dog knows you're coming home. That takes time to build up, right? Even though you're not there, the dog can sense, like some sort of sixth sense, that you are coming home. So you've impressed and shared your consciousness. You've essentially entangled those light photons with the dog, okay? And that thought, that energy is going to sit there, and that because of that interaction, that chain is not broken by time or space, okay? It's not bound physically by anything. It doesn't matter where you are. So that means the consciousness of the dog becomes elevated over time, right? The emotional state, the share between both of you, the connection between becomes that much stronger. So you're actually bringing them up at the same time because they can feel the energies, the human energies with their canine energies, right? So the density of information or light quotient that they have is like almost touching or always getting doused with a little bit of a higher density of vibration that we carry as human beings. So it's like you're always just dripping them or like, spritzing them with water.
Well, it's like the dog whisperer dude. I love that guy.
Cesar Millan.
Yeah, Cesar Millan. He has this ability, and it can only be explained through energy and consciousness.
Yeah, that's the only
he has the ability to go walk. A dog could be like, like you would know you would get bit.
Yeah, I'm not going.
And he's going to walk in a fence, and instantly that dog just submits to him.
Yeah, and you could say it's the presence of him, but it'd be impossible for the dog to tell immediately that's the alpha.
Right.
There's no scent. It's not smelling him, saying like, ooh, I got to calm down. This guy's much bigger than me. No, there's something about his consciousness, his focus,
right,
that he is actually impressing on the dog.
And he has worked that over time because he said he lived in Mexico, and then he worked with dogs as a small child with the ones that were like, because dogs just run around wild there.
Correct.
So he would work with wild dogs from a little child.
Yeah.
So he developed this ability on a conscious level to be able to communicate with dogs. That's how I see it.
That's precisely correct. And so let's take it a step further. You're talking about animals. Okay, so now I used this example for someone the other day because they were asking me about, consciousness and like objects and like meditating. And like there were like, what are the limits of, thought, right? Conscious thought. So I said, do you ever remember Star Wars when Luke Skywalker is on Hoth? And he's hanging upside down and the Yeti thing's there like eating his tauntaun. I can't believe I remember all these words. And he's reaching for the lightsaber, but it's a distance away. It's like kind of hard packed in the ice and it's like wiggling and then it flies into his hand, slides himself out, saved. So how he's using the Force? So the Force is like a fantastic metaphor for consciousness. And I always wondered, is the Force real?
Right.
So through my periods of meditation, right, and, reflective thought, and going through the deductive processes, I was like, well, if consciousness is everything, if it is pervasive in everything, like dark matter, it makes up like 90+%, and if I understand that what makes up me, like on a quantum level, also makes up other material, whether it be animate or inanimate,
right,
then, and I know my consciousness can affect how I feel, can I affect other things? So I considered for a little bit, I'm like, well, what about, physical objects? I'm like, can they be moved by thought alone? So before I even tested my theory, I was like, has anyone done any research on this? So I found that actually in Russia, as our first point of example, there's an institute, like a university over there, that does multiple months of training to teach people actually how to move very lightweight objects with their consciousness in vacuum sealed containers. I'm sorry, like they're moving objects by thinking about it? Yeah.
Yeah,
so
this sounds like people are looking at this and sounds like it's like pseudoscience, but it's
not.
Actually, yeah.
This took them a long time to figure this out, especially the scientific process for how to actually vet that the object is moving via consciousness alone, right? So once you remove all other physical variables, there's only one possible thing that can move in that direction. Now, what they did is they started with very light objects like tinfoil, suspended it, in some sort of jar, whatever it might be, and then the individual would consciously sit there for hours on end and think about what direction they wanted this object to rotate in. And only in time when the individual would call out the direction they want to rotate it in, and then it would rotate, did they finally figure out that the impression of consciousness on non-physical objects is possible. You can actually move objects with thought and intent alone.
Because everything has energy.
Everything has energy. Everything has that consciousness.
It's vibrating.
And what it requires is an immense amount of focus, and that requires practice. So, even in meditation, you're doing an internal focus. So now what we're doing is we're taking that almost that meditative state and moving it into, I'm just going to focus on one solitary thing. And I'm going to connect with it on a level of consciousness, right? I'm going to create those apexes of energy, like we talked about in Dan A. Davidson's book, Shape Power.
Right.
We're going to create all those vertices of thought. So there's so much energy around it that I can then manipulate that energy through my conscious thought because they're both one and the same. And so Russia was really apt to take this on first. They're like, this is something that we're willing to study, and it's not as foo-foo for us over here.
Right.
Russia's also very willing to talk about UFOs. They got a bunch of pyramids built all over the place. Russia's really interesting. And so what I did is I took that study, that field of thought over there, and I brought it over here and I tried to practice it, for my own. And then once you begin to see that, and it took weeks of just looking at the same stupid little foil object, right, in a sealed container, and then trying to get that to move. No electromagnetic interruption, no magnets, no wind, nothing. And then actually using your consciousness and your focus to get that to spin in a certain direction. And this is not an impossibility. I know Luke Skywalker's lightsaber was very heavy.
Right.
Right? But I'm talking about that would require an immense amount of focus from what I understand through my own experience now. So,
but he had to go through a process of learning.
But it's a process of learning, right? And, Star Wars has a fantastic, the movie is but a great metaphor for consciousness, right?
Yes, and the hero's journey.
Yeah, and the hero's journey and the balance between light and dark and using consciousness,
to
right?
get you to the next level,
right. To essentially elevate yourself.
Yes.
So, what I would challenge some of the listeners, if they're good meditators, go through and actually, get accustomed with an object, an inanimate object, something very, very light. Just start with your tinfoil. Try and knock it over with your mind, whatever. Just get accustomed with it and realize you'll start to see that there's more than what really met the eye in your perspective of this world, is that the non-physical, your thoughts alone, can have a direct physical impact on things that are around you in your reality. And that has to tell you that consciousness itself is interwoven into absolutely everything, living or non-living. That means the basal quantum structure of everything, even smaller than a quantum structure, has to be consciousness. It has to be that pure form of energy. It has to be that pure form of light.
It's the experiencing of experiencing. It's the experience of experiencing.
It is an experience of experiencing. That's
Yes.
a really interesting way of putting that, yeah. And so, I mean, and that's where that kind of took me, right? So,
yeah, have you ever heard of Bernardo Kastrup?
No. But you could...
He calls this, as a scientist, ontology idealism. And according to him, all of us, as we perceive, are manifestations of something very much like a cosmic smell, a scale, and they call it this DID, or dissociative identity disorder. He suggests there's an all-encompassing universe-wide conscious, and it has multiple personalities, and we're them.
Yeah, I don't think it's a dissociative identity. I think it's more of an
he's talking about, because each of us are uniquely different, but yet we're all one.
Yeah, and again, this ties back into that conversation I had the other day.
Because people bring that up. They're like, well, if we're all one and it's just a big universal consciousness, then why is somebody in Iraq have a totally different viewpoint than somebody in Portland, Oregon?
Well, they can, because it's like, let's consider this. Everybody's a drop of water, right? And that drop of water, if you study any water molecule, it will always find its way back to the ocean, no matter where it is. Even if we're dry and arid here in the desert,
right,
that water molecule will find its way back there. So that individual, very personalized piece of water could be dirty, right? Could have a certain color to it because of the algae, right? Say that's the personality of it, and it's in a specific geographic area. It's going to then move into like a river.
Right.
And now you're moving into like a flow of a whole bunch of these different things, but they're all individually their own water droplet.
Right.
But as a collective, they have a lot of force and power to it. And that river then finds its way to the ocean. But it doesn't mean that, just because someone is somewhere else geographically and because they have a different perspective, doesn't mean that they're not also associated with that greater body of water, that ocean,
right,
or that ocean of consciousness that we're all a part of. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Just because it's out of sight and out of mind doesn't mean it really isn't there. So that's when I looked at it. I was like, so if you're looking at consciousness, consider yourself as that unique drop of water, and you're albeit separated, but still connected all the time, because at the base level, it's, it's that H2O, it's that molecule,
right?
But it does build that huge body, that ocean of force.
Yeah, I love that. Now, we know there's prevailing theories for consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one, I think the one, especially here in Europe and the United States, is materialism.
Yeah.
And that is the notion that consciousness emanates from matter, and in our case, by the firing of neurons inside the brain.
Yeah, and so I'm glad someone brought that theory.
So a lot of people say that it's just internal.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about
consciousness is just in our brain.
Yeah, it's created by the function of the brain.
Yes.
So here's the problem with that, and this is where this was disproven by the Stanford Research Institute some time ago, with a bunch of funding from government, NASA, CIA, stuff like that. And we talked about him on one of our first episodes, right? And we were speaking about the point that consciousness actually resides outside of the body.
Right.
It's not bound by space or time, and it's not created by the brain. Because what they found is that the consciousness actually moves from vessel to vessel, right? The consciousness actually comes and inhabits the physical body. And because it does that, because it lives on forever, it's not something you can get rid of. It's like thermodynamics. It's just changing form, that energy. What they found is that that's what allowed it to do that remote viewing, right? To move itself back in time, to look at different sequences, or to move itself forward in time to see things that hadn't happened yet, or what the probability of them are. Because it lives outside of that physical locked, universal structure that we're currently in our reality. So when you talk that prevailing theory that people have talked about, that still gets pushed in our Western medicine, that the brain and our synapses firing, right, like the salts and that electrical mechanism.
Well, a lot of scientists actually believe if you take the brain out of the question, you have absolutely no consciousness.
Well, that's not true. So there was another gentleman. He was a hydrocephalic. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name.
Heisenberg?
No, hydrocephalic. So there was more fluid in the skull than there was actually brain matter. And I believe he had 1% brain matter. But the thing is, he was still able to function normally, still had a high IQ, and still was able to recall a bunch of conscious thoughts and memories. So the question is, well, how is someone that still maintains this high IQ can still do all these different things but doesn't have a brain? So again, that sits outside of the bucket to say that consciousness is created by the electrical synapses of the brain. It has to live outside of it.
Well, we're already at the point where we're understanding that we can download our brain through neural links into the cloud.
Yeah, because Microsoft.
They're doing that right now.
It's like 432 petaflops of info per DNA or something. I don't know.
So when we get into, and that's something I want to get into, what it creates this big chasm of relativity and quantum mechanics. So when you get into those two, even though you may be a staunch materialist, like most scientists are,
correct.
Now we have issues. And this is what I want to talk about, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Yeah.
So you begin to recognize, okay, they don't have all the answers, but how quickly do we just submit to what we feel, okay, this person wrote these papers, they did this great thing, they're way smarter than me. That theory, because it's just a theory, that theory sounds good to me, and I'll just accept that as my reality. You're going to accept a person's paper or their white paper as your reality.
And determine that's your reality, right?
Yes.
Especially when there's no experience of that reality itself, right? It was just someone else's experience writing this. Now, let's think about this, though. What you're talking about, Jason, is people living in a world of paradox. Now, this is interesting that we still choose one or the other, black or white.
Yes.
But we're pushing ourselves towards quantum mechanics, which says that something can be 0 and 1 at the same time.
Right.
So why is it that we push this view over here, but still live in a materialistic world of paradoxes when something can be in two places at once?
And we know scientifically that quantum mechanics is proven. We have quantum computers coming on the scene.
Yeah, we got plenty of them over here at the labs.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? But the point is that we have this like hypocritical viewpoint, is that we'll go and accept this black and white theory over here, but really the true physics or understanding the situation is that it is both at the same time. There is no paradox. Right. All your paradoxes are actually solved. Don't worry about that choice.
But here's what's happened in the old days. We had staunch materialism, and then we had, which is the second theory, and that is mind-body dualism, that the spiritual side takes.
Yes.
So the scientific side puts their hard part in the sand and says, here's where we're at. And then the spiritual people like, oh, okay, I believe in a universal God, whether you're monotheistic or whatever you may be, or maybe you believe that there are multiple gods or whatever. And then that's kind of some foo-foo thing that we got off of these sacred writings.
Well,
but they're not. I want people to understand they're not separate.
They're not separate. And because you say that, it's almost like the mind-body dualism is a closer approach to quantum mechanics and understanding than the typical materialistic philosophy.
The problem with mind-body dualism is that they believe consciousness is separate from matter.
Right.
Which it's not.
Which it's not. And again, we've shown that through the research, right, with Stanford Research Institute, that consciousness is matter. Consciousness is pervasive in everything. Consciousness defines the shape of this reality.
And they want to take consciousness, these religious people take consciousness and they wrap it up into this little thing called a soul.
Yeah, don't. Don't. You can't say that, because consciousness are the cells of your body. It is the memory, right? It is the spirit. It is all these different things. It is the makeup. It's the geometric form. It's the light. It's the vibration. It's the color.
Right. But now there's this third
view. What's the third one?
That it's actually been gaining some strength since the 1980s. And it's becoming prominent in scientific circles. And we're going to like this one.
I like things that I like.
It's called, hopefully I pronounce this right, here, I'm going to let you look at this. Look at this. These are my notes right here. Pantheism?
No, panpsychism.
Yeah, panpsychism. This view is the entire universe is inhabited by consciousness.
Of course it is. Duh. No.
And scientists are actually, there's a great debate with this, but they're actually warming up to this. Because now we're starting to get to Buddhists and Hinduism and the Brahman and this tremendous universal Godhead that we look at. But we can start looking at these and say, in only things do those things exist.
Yes. And that's what's kind of cool. I'm glad you brought that up, is that when you start refining and like you leave those other two theories and you move over into panpsychism, where consciousness pervades everything.
Yes.
Well, now you've just essentially stepped back in time to what these books that are 3,000 years old have been telling you exactly what was going on,
right.
but you just ignored it. But only you've come full circle in your scientific, studies to find out, wait a minute, this is starting to make a little bit more sense.
But reality, this is what people don't understand. This is what I love when I was studying this. Last podcast, you brought notes. I didn't have any. This time, I brought notes.
I'm glad you brought notes.
And you don't have any. But we have to come to realization that everything we experience is filtered through and interpreted by our mind.
Correct. And so...
But without that, the universe doesn't exist at all.
Right. There is, essentially, if we're not perceiving things with our mind right now,
right.
with these physical inputs, then there is no existence in this body.
Right.
But if you were to say consciousness doesn't need to perceive through a physical vessel, well, then there is always the universe. It has always been there.
Yes, it's
right?
always.
It is always there, always will be.
And people that are of a religious perspective can say, omnipresent, omniscient, all that stuff. Especially on the Christian side of things, they'll say, God is universal. He's always been here.
Yeah.
Which is an explanation whether you want to label it, God or whatever.
Call it God, call whatever you want. Source, creator, universal consciousness, intelligent infinity, anything like that.
But this one tripped me up for like a week. I was reading a book on Zen philosophy, and there's a Zen proverb. If a tree, you've heard this before, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Of course it does.
And I think that right there.
Yeah.
I was starting to think about that a lot.
But it's interesting because then that determines, is it to say that we're the ones that...
I didn't experience it fall.
So does it say it's not real?
Yes.
Yeah. Did it
do you see where
occur?
I went with that?
No, and that's essentially what it's getting at, is it's pushing the conscious thought of perspective of reality. Just because I wasn't there, just because I didn't experience it, doesn't mean it isn't real.
Right.
Just because I haven't meditated, just because I haven't experienced it, doesn't mean I should knock it and not try it.
Yes.
Just because I haven't moved an object with my consciousness doesn't mean it's not real. It may be on the ass end of probability, right? But when you actually move closer to it and you think about it, then there has to be some sort of semblance of experience, whether it is for the tree or consciousness surrounding it. But it did happen. It does make that noise.
Yeah, and when you start looking into quantum mechanics, which is causing these scientists to look at this, particles don't have a definite shape or a specific location.
No, they don't.
Until, and this is the tree,
quarks, gluons, everything.
They are observed or measured.
Right. And that's
think about that, bro.
And I'm glad you said that, right? Because then we come into the system of measurement.
Right.
Because this is how we as human beings, with our perspective and what we've been brought up, is that things need to be measured to be understood.
Right.
That this table that we're talking across from has a specific size. But if you look at it from the perspective of infinite consciousness, it's also infinitely long. It's just because we determined an inch is an inch.
Right.
Okay? It's just because we determined a day is a day. It's just because we determined that the body ages. We need something to measure because it helps people hold on to the physicality of this current reality.
But doesn't that learning and teaching, but when we look at the learning, isn't that what creates self-awareness?
Yeah, it does create
to
self-awareness.
Study the table.
Yeah.
In all of its different forms and realities.
Yeah.
And to begin to understand all of those is the beginning. And they talk about this called proto-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard about that. But have you ever heard of John Archibald Wheeler?
No.
Yeah. This dude, he's the one that came up with the black hole.
Really?
The name, the black hole. He's a scientist and philosopher. And so his view is this: every piece of matter contains a bit of consciousness, which it absorbs from the proto-conscious field. And he calls this theory, they use all these big words. You like when I
love big words. Yeah, this is great. I love watching you try to pronounce it.
Participatory anthropic principle.
Nice.
And that is, a human observer is the key to the process. Of this, Wheeler said, we are participators in bringing to being not only the near and here, but the far away and long ago.
Yeah, that's
in
correct.
his view, much like the Buddhist one, nothing exists unless there is a consciousness to apprehend it.
Yeah.
To apprehend it.
To apprehend it, right? So because it's in a state of It is always existing.
But how are we creating bringing into being?
Because
not only the near and here, but the far away and along.
Because you call to it with your consciousness. Consciousness is not bound by time or space. So even if it was far away or a long time ago, you can still bring these things into this reality now. Consciousness is that gluey, sticky principle, that all pervasive one that can go out and reach for these things. It can pull it into this physical reality that we currently know, and you can impress that into those objects because all matter has a little bit of consciousness in it. So like the dog,
yes,
or the tinfoil.
Oh, you're leading me right into
right, like the dog or the tinfoil.
So awesome.
How much are you going to actually, focus on it and bring that into your life?
Right.
How much are you going to connect with those small pieces of consciousness that sits inside of all that matter?
Listen to Christoph Koch of the Allen Institute for Brain Science. This is amazing what he said. Biological organisms are conscious because when they approach a new situation, they can change their behavior in order to navigate it. In this view, Dr. Koch assumed to see if he can measure the level of consciousness an organism contains.
Sure, depending on how much they react to a certain situation.
Yeah, but I mean, your consciousness coming by approaching those new situations.
Yes.
So when I look at it at a level of religion, where there's hardcore black and white rules, that level of consciousness that's where you start creating war. And we did a whole podcast on religion, but that's where you start creating war. You're having people, they're not looking and not learning and teaching. They're not getting to that higher level of consciousness, because when we have black and white set rules like that, that's where we begin to degrade.
Yes.
As mankind. Because
you force them to sit inside of a paradox. It has to be one or the other. But the truth is the combination of both, right? So getting to that solve or resolve will only happen by choosing to experience that without limiting yourself through a perspective of consciousness. So to accept the viewpoint that all is consciousness allows you to move out of that black and white and move into a more natural quantum state, if you'd want to call it,
Yeah, and there's a UK physicist named Sir. So Sir, he was knighted.
Yeah.
Sir Roger Penrose.
Yeah, Penrose Tiles. Cool dude.
Yeah, and so Dr. Penrose says this: the law of physics produces complex systems, and these complex systems lead to consciousness. That's what he said, which then produces mathematics.
Yeah.
Which I love, because mathematics is produced off of consciousness, which can then encode into a second inspiring way that very underlying laws of physics that give rise to it.
Yeah, and so in his giving rise is he went through patterns. So he looked at the pattern recognition of physics and consciousness in mathematics, right? And he blended all three of those things together. And he's he's known for the Penrose tile. It's a specific set of geometric patterns. But apart from that, he's looking at like fractals, how the universe is actually broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller bits, but they're all still a part of the greater whole. It's like our water drop thing.
Right.
It is, albeit small, but it is still a water drop.
Yes.
And that's what he's looking at. So consciousness can get smaller and smaller and smaller, but it is still a piece of the greater piece of consciousness.
But how to get to a level of higher consciousness, we go back to that Temple of Apollo at Delphi.
Yeah.
When they say, know thyself, and thou shalt know all the mysteries of the gods in the universe.
Correct. So if I'm going to focus on this tin can, and this tin can could, over time, give me all of my answers.
Right.
Because it would force me to reflect on how I perceive it in reality. But then from that, I would begin to realize that I am also that consciousness of the tin can. So when I just skip the tin can, I'll just focus on me.
Yeah, because you can look at the Bible or some sacred, and you can use that object to bring self-awareness. But internally, you have that in you.
You always have it in you.
Yes.
And
you don't need that external.
No. And one of our earlier podcasts we did, like back in the beginning, I spoke about the best book for learning is the book of you, right? So having that internal self-reflection gives you the highest amount of teaching. It finds you the best resolve. It allows you to get rid of that dis-ease. And you can focus on what you really truly are, is that piece of consciousness and that interconnection to everything else. And it's funny to think that you can come to all those answers, but you really can. You can really refine your perspective of reality by focusing internally on who you are.
Because when you begin to focus on you, you begin to realize that you're a manifestation of all of the universal consciousness.
And then if you know that is the truth for you, then you realize that that is also the truth for everyone else, whether or not they see it. So what does that tell you? It tells you that they're all interconnected by universal consciousnness.
And then what you do to yourself, you do to others.
That's exactly correct.
It becomes the law of one.
It becomes the law of one. It's a very reflexive property.
Yeah, that's what I have in my notes.
Yeah.
So the way you treat your nature is the way you treat yourself.
Yeah. Remember they said,
separateness that you see through your ego?
Yeah.
Think about that.
What are you doing? You're just separating others. You're creating a false perspective of reality.
Because things appear distinct
up here. You know?
But they are not separate.
No.
There's nothing separate from us.
Nothing is never separate. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita and those Vedic scripts, they even talk about this web jewel-like structure that sits and pervades through everything, and that's how the information is moved. It's this net of consciousness. You know, not the internet.
The net.
But just the net, right? It's just, I don't know, but yeah.
But I mean, but I want to get into a more practical with this.
I love practical.
Because we've gone 45 minutes, so I want to get into this to help people out. People need to understand, and this is something that I've started to just begin to learn, is we're able to create our ideal reality because I'm already connected to everything that I've ever wanted and everything that I ever needed. And if my intentions are at a highest level of consciousness, whether I drive a Porsche Ferrari or a Toyota Camry, it does not matter. Because at the end, my higher conscious self is not going to try to, that's the problem with the law of abundance and all that. You know, I mean, that's true. I get that. But you're at a lower level conscious being sitting there thinking, I need $1 million. I need $1 million. I need $1 million. I need a Bugatti. I need a Bugatti. That is not your higher self's true purpose or intent.
No, all you're doing is you're just creating a massive amount of focus on some material item that will end up disappearing and has no weight or refinement for your character.
Yeah, it has of no significance or value. The universe is looking at it as being a small matter of something that is to create to your higher purpose. Yeah. You're looking at it as your end all be all.
It is not
like
the end all be all.
I've made all my success off of by having $1 million in the bank and having this $30 million car. But that's not the true case in who you are.
That is not success. The question I would then ask you is, what have you learned?
Right.
And most people haven't learned anything but how to acquire money. Right. But they've never learned truly about who they are or themselves, right? And if they looked at the research to see that consciousness resides outside of the body and it will always be,
right?
Why not focus on that thing?
Yes.
Refine that thing, you know?
Yeah, and I wrote this, nothing and no one is separate from you.
No. Which kind of wakes me out because, I mean, you're all close to me.
No. But so when we, because I want to look at this, because when we start looking at universal consciousness and the biggest thing, and I talked about this on, I went Instagram Live this morning on my Instagram, ABQ Jason Rigby, by the way.
Nice plug.
And yours is
Turtle Official.
Yes. When I was looking at it, and a study came out this morning, I was reading on Google News, and they said 70% of people are unhappy with their work.
Sure.
So you're spending over half your life in a job, and I said you're literally whoring out your time.
You are.
For the dead president's pieces of paper.
Yeah. So not even getting into the political economic side, you've never focused on what you truly cared about or wanted. And if you had done that,
right,
you would never have sat in that job. You wouldn't be that 70%er. You'd be that 1%er that knows exactly who they are, knows exactly what they want, and exactly what they should be doing.
Yes.
To derive the highest amount of purpose and learning for themselves so that they can continually refine. Bring clarity to if you're a water drop, just keep filtering it out.
Yes.
Raise that pH up. Be as crystalline as possible.
And I love the story because it brings it to reality of the MBA. He was in an MBA class, and the teacher's looking. It was like, one of the big Harvard, Yale, or whatever. Yeah. And he's looking out, and he had 400 students in there. And he looks at him, and he says, how many of you really love money? How many of you really love business? He's like, be honest with me. Just a few people raised their hand. He goes, why are you here? He goes, and he says, if money was no object, and he had these students stand up, and like one girl said, she goes, I love horses. I absolutely love horses. I would love to be. He goes, why aren't you doing that? Why are you sitting in my class?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
You're not wasting my time. You're wasting your time.
Right. And it was interesting because like one guy said, he goes, I love diving. I love swimming. I love being in the ocean. I love everything to do. I love studying animals, from the ocean and stuff. He goes, why are you here?
This guy's like a James Cameron 2.0. Yes. Like, go get your submarine,
Yes, exactly.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. It's like, but why would we sit there in that MBA class?
Because they don't know what they want.
A piece of paper that says we have a master's in business administration.
They've never.
What does that mean,
Jason? They've never focused on themselves. There's been no internal focus.
We've given up our whole, and we can use the word soul or whatever, but we've given up our whole soul for papers from universities and papers with dead presidents on it, and that stuff literally
that somebody
1,000 years
else
from
told
now,
me was valuable.
Yes, is not going to exist.
No,
I don't care what your parents say.
Yeah.
People that, and I want people to understand this, people that truly love you can give you really bad advice.
All the time.
Their intention's good, But that advice can be bad.
That's why you got to look at it and be like, well, thank you for the bad advice. Now I know what not to do.
Yeah, every mother wants you to be a doctor, lawyer, and work for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what
the slave ship. That's what they call Goldman Sachs. But Jason, think about what you just said. Bad advice, right? 70% of those people live a life of bad advice, and people are listening to them. Those are what people say corporate leaders are. Why are you listening to those? They don't even know what they want.
Yes.
So how could that be your leader? A leader should be someone who knows exactly who they are, what they want, and they should teach that.
But when you think about it, the number one thing that you would want as being a higher self would be happiness.
Yeah.
True love, perfect health, and abundance.
All attainable.
Yes. All you have to do is bring yourself into that vibrational harmony.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally it is, and you bring it into nature.
You call it with consciousness.
It's like I was listening to a guy the other day, and he was talking about the hunting aspect of things, which is different or whatever. But I really enjoyed when I was listening to him. He was on Paul Chek. But what I got out of it and what Paul was talking about, which is really cool.
Living in 4D.
Yeah, he was talking about, the guy was talking about the experience of being out in nature, which we never are. We go from our car to office to home.
God, it makes me sick.
And then we're never in nature. And he's like, just learning to be in nature and be, one with that. Then he was talking about like being in, I get where he's talking about like, gutting the animal and all that stuff with the mitochondria and being in but you can do the same thing like a kid goes out and plays in the dirt.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. There's a spiritual level that's going on there. When that child is, they did a study, he was talking about this, is real interesting. They did a study where they took kids that were super ADD and they let them go hog wild and go play in the woods for 4 hours. And they did that a couple times a week. And in 2 months, their ADD was cleared.
That's great.
Think about that. Think about that study.
I think,
it's like a cooped up dog in your house. It is a cooped up dog. You have to let them
dog, and
go run.
That's when they're their best boy. That's when it's a good boy.
Yes.
Is after they've exhausted themselves out there.
It's that creating harmony with nature.
Yeah, what they're doing is they're essentially out of balance and they're going back to find it.
Right.
Because you are connected to all of those things. So why don't I leave this materialistic, sharp, cornered, square angles of a society that I live in, and let me move into something round and fluid, right, and more etheric.
But I guarantee you, when you look at every significant thing that has happened in mankind, whether it's an invention, whether it's our technology, whatever, I guarantee you those creative power of thoughts came when they're in nature. Or a high percentage of them.
Yeah, or in a state that is in flow with nature.
Yes.
Or the universe itself. Nuclear, most of our nuclear equations or equations on energy from Einstein came from a meditative state. Most of Nikola Tesla's fantastic inventions came from a meditative state.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at
number
nature,
zero.
I was watching a nature documentary the other day, and it was showing, like this, like lion cub or whatever.
Oh, it's not monkeys this time?
No, it wasn't monkeys. Yeah, they're ruthless, by the way. If you
They'll
watch
cheat and steal.
They will cheat and steal, but they also rip each other's arms off and rip their heads off. I saw that. I was like, holy smokes. Ego edits. But I was watching this, and I could be sympathetic with it, and I was perceiving my thought, emotions, and feelings watching this cub struggle. Because the cub was like whining and it was going through, it was like gnawing at its paw, it was limping. And I'm like, this guy's not going to last very long. But, it's not. This is nature. That's the way it goes. But at the same time, I'm looking at it under the conditions that I would face. I'm looking at it and I'm sympathizing with it. Why am I getting emotional?
Under your perceived experience.
Yes.
But that thing, right, that other entity is living its own experience of lessons.
So why was my hormonal levels going crazy? Why was my heart rate elevated? Why did my blood pressure go up watching this on television? Yeah. It's just a film watching this little cub try to survive.
Because your consciousness is associated with that experience.
Yes.
You're associating with survival.
I'm consciously experiencing its pain.
You were in the military. You know what survival is.
Yep.
You know what that pain feels like. You know what it's like to be like, wow, I'm really squeezed in a corner right now. This doesn't look good. And
as science goes moving in the direction that the things that we thought on a conscious level that were only in us, they're finding in nature.
Yeah, they're finding everywhere.
With trees.
Yeah, with trees, or the guy that created the lie detector.
Right.
He strapped the thing to plant leaves and realized that the plants didn't react to him actually coming over and cutting the leaf, but it was the point of thought. The moment he thought about it gave huge erratic electrical impulses coming from the plant to the machine.
Yeah, and bees. They did a study here recently. They can look at faces and understand the differences in faces.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then they wagged them, to let them know where the best places is for the pollen. Wow. They just wag their little ass and tell each other where they're going to be and what it is. So think about that.
It's like Bee Movie with.
So how do you? So no, you're going to wag your ass. You're going to twerk, basically. Bees twerking for fun.
Full-time twerk.
Yeah, and it's going to through that communicate to another bee the complex navigational system to get exactly where it needs to be. So think about the size of a bee and think about that mile that it has to navigate. And then how many miles would we have to navigate with our size? Hundreds of miles?
Hundreds.
And then it would be like me looking at you, twerking to you. That's not a pretty sight.
I know exactly where to go.
And then you're like, okay, thanks. I know exactly where to go 100 miles, specifically to the pinpoint of a plant.
That's phenomenal.
That has to be consciousness. It's
they're
not just wagging your ass on a physical way.
They're feeling consciousness.
Yes.
Don't sell that data to the U.S. Navy or something because they'll be launching rockets on twerks.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They'll see one video on YouTube and be like, I know exactly where to launch this thing.
Yeah, and they've done, bees are amazing. They've done certain things where they put scents into hives.
Yeah.
And then the bees go away or they go to another hive, but they can always return to that one based off of that scent from that hive. And amazing. Think about that. They can go, like they were doing this in Europe and they were like, they could be kilometers away and then be able to, you can't, they physically cannot smell that smell.
They're not smelling it. It's the vibrational frequency.
Yes,
it's that consciousness that is sitting there. You remember that light photon that we said that was in the jar of the DNA? Mm-hmm. It's still sitting there. They're moving back to that vibration, that essentially a piece of universe or piece of consciousness.
Yes, and as they begin to get into even simple forms of animals, their nervous systems they begin to see are extremely high complex.
And
like
probably,
insects.
Jason, I'd bet that they're probably extremely intuitive.
Yes.
I bet you they're more intuitive. Well, obviously they're not logical.
Well,
thinkers.
what they begin is that they're starting to see a consciousness in the proteins, in the genes.
Love that.
Yes. I mean, we know in the cell level, the
genes.
neuronal level and stuff like that. But when you get into actual breaking it down, even to the mode of like, we're all protein. I mean, I'm a protein animal.
I am. All I do is create protein. That's what my DNA does.
So when they begin to see that there's a consciousness just in the protein, I mean, think about that.
And that shows you at the biological level, right? That, consciousness is not only small, but it is also large. We watch people move in groups. We feel things. We get sensations or the thought that I should probably call someone because I think they're in trouble. That's just consciousness reaching out.
That's all it is. And at the end of the day, whether you're, like I said, I mean, a dolphin has a more sophisticated brain than we do.
Sure.
And they can do things. They play. They have fun. They can be ruthless to each other, but depending on what.
Imagine if you gave the dolphin legs and just walk around the street.
Yeah. And then their language is superior to ours.
They're aliens.
I mean, how can a whale hear another whale across the planet? No, we haven't come up with that yet.
That's amazing.
I can't speak and you hear me in China.
No, but also like where they choose to migrate to, it's not just the food aspect of it, but they just always seem to find themselves in the right part of the ocean.
Or an elephant can remember everybody that he's ever encountered and every face.
It's like a water buffalo. Big tongue swinging, but man, those things never forget. Like a crow. A crow never forgets a face.
Exactly. Yeah. They've already proven that.
And I don't.
How does that capacity to be able to?
But their brain's smaller. They don't have as many.
Yeah, exactly.
So then it would probably tell me that it has something to do with the energetic signature of that experience.
Yeah, and they were talking about you can take a grain size of the cortex of a brain, whether it's a mouse, a monkey, a human, or whatever. That same structural DNA is equivalent when it comes to a level of consciousness in them. So that tells me whether you're a mouse, a bee, a monkey, whatever it may be, human, we all have this ability to be able to, a mouse can have a higher level of consciousness.
Sure.
I mean, why do we feel like humans are the only ones that can do that? A tree.
Dude, it's just that ego.
With hundreds of years.
Yeah, the tree's been around a lot longer. It's been listening to the soil.
Yes.
It's like that ADHD
Our
kid.
crystal.
You know the ADHD kid?
Yes.
Imagine the ADHD kid being out in the woods for 300 years. That kid would be in tune. Nothing else. So to say that tree, isn't at an advanced level of communication or conscious thought or structure or, energy, Come on. That's an egotistical comment.
It is, yeah. It's amazing to me. And I want people, and we'll end with this, Alex, I'll ask you this question. How do we become more self-aware in the sense of, everybody always talks about tapping into this universal consciousness. What can we do as a human race?
Yeah.
I can't control my dog or anything like that,
No.
his level of thought. But what can I do internally to create self-awareness?
You got to become more intuitive with yourself, right? So you need to understand who you are. And that starts with the deductive reasoning of why. Why am I Jason? Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why do I feel this way? And then once you start cutting away at those untruths, you'll get down to the core things of who you are, and that's going to refine your perspective. And then once you get that refined perspective, you can begin to focus on the things that are important, right?
Those calcified untruths.
Those calcified untruths. We're just going to decalcify them.
Yes.
We're going to get them out of there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then you begin to see the false narrative that you're living in this false reality.
Yeah.
And that's what higher density living is all about, is walking on that cliff's edge.
And we're going to be on that cliff's edge. And whether you do it with meditation or deductive, asking yourself why to find out who you truly are, you're going to get there. But you just got to take it one step at a time.
I love it. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Alex. I think we've done over an hour.
It's perfect.
It's awesome.
Jason, all is one.
Yep, all is one. Next week, back at it.
Back at it. I'm bringing notes.
Good. We'll do yours next week. Mine
Thanks.
was, we need to do trees, though.
We'll do trees.
Trees?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll study trees.
See you, everybody.
Okay, bye.